Picture this for a second. You're out on your deck on a beautiful, sunny afternoon.
Oh, yeah. Best feeling.
Right. You've got a fresh cup of coffee, you're walking around barefoot, and you're just looking out at the view. And the surface, right beneath your feet, feels completely solid. I mean, like concrete.
Just totally secure.
Exactly. But structurally speaking, you might actually be standing on a giant wet sponge that is, well, only being held together by a few taut strips of vinyl.
Which is a slightly terrifying reality, honestly, when you look closely at the physics of residential construction.
It really is.
I mean, we put absolute trust in these structures, right? We're hosting barbecues, we're leaning against the railings, and we are just entirely unaware of the silent deterioration happening in the dark spaces we can't see.
And uncovering that hidden reality is our whole mission for this deep dive. Today, we're analyzing a really comprehensive stack of material from Rain City Decks.
Yeah, they're a specialized repair company out of North Vancouver.
Right. And we are going to decode the vital difference between a deck that, looks completely fine on the surface and a deck that is actually structurally sound.
Which means we are using British Columbia's coastal climate as our ultimate testing ground for this.
Oh, absolutely.
North Vancouver specifically provides this extreme, accelerated stress test for building materials. If a deck construction flaw exists, that specific climate will find it and just exploit it mercilessly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to truly understand how a deck works, we first have to understand the specific environmental enemies trying to tear it down.
For sure.
In a place like the Pacific Northwest, it's not just a little rain. We're talking about a relentless onslaught.
Yeah, you're really dealing with microclimates here. Like, a deck in North Vancouver isn't just getting wet, it's enduring a brutal cycle.
Right, it's constant.
Exactly. You have months of heavy, continuous moisture. Then, you often have dense, towering trees throwing constant shade over the property.
Which means nothing dries out.
Right. That shade prevents any trapped moisture from ever evaporating. And then add in the freeze-thaw cycles of winter and the intense UV rays in the summer, just baking the materials.
It sounds awful for the wood.
It's an environment actively trying to dismantle the structure 365 days a year.
And the building authorities totally know this. BC Housing actually outlines 4 non-negotiable principles for building durable decks in this kind of environment.
Which are super important to keep in mind.
Yeah, they are structural design, moisture management, material selection, and maintenance. But looking at these materials, the central villain they are constantly defending against is moisture.
Always moisture.
Water is just relentless.
Yeah.
It'll find a way in through, microscopic cracks in the membrane, through open seams, or around pore flashing.
Let's define flashing for a second, actually, because that's a term thrown around constantly in construction.
Yeah, good idea.
Flashing is essentially a series of, metal detour signs built into the deck. It's strategically placed sheet metal designed to force water away from the vulnerable joints.
Especially where it attaches to the house, right?
Exactly, that critical intersection where your deck physically attaches to your house. When water bypasses those metal detours, you have a major, major problem.
So think about your deck's vinyl membrane or its waterproofing, like a heavy-duty winter raincoat.
I like that analogy.
Right. So if you were standing in a freezing downpour and you have even a tiny microscopic tear right on the shoulder of that jacket,
Yeah.
The other 99% of the coat being flawless doesn't matter.
Not at all.
The water gets through that tiny hole and suddenly your thick wool sweater underneath is completely soaked.
And let's take that raincoat analogy a step further, because the stakes are much higher than just being uncomfortable.
Oh, definitely.
People tend to view deck waterproofing as a cosmetic finish, almost like a coat of paint. But in wet climate, it's not a finish. It is a highly engineered structural protection system.
So it's guarding the actual bones of the structure. It's not just keeping your feet dry, it's keeping the floor from collapsing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely changes how you look at a simple crack in your deck's surface.
It really does.
Once water breaches that raincoat, it immediately begins attacking the load-bearing layers. The plywood substrate, which is the thick wood layer directly beneath the vinyl, it absorbs the water like a sponge.
Which is exactly what you don't want.
Right, and then it drips down into the joists, the heavy structural beams, and the metal fasteners holding the entire assembly together.
Which means that weird little stain you see on your vinyl, or that slightly separated seam, isn't just an ugly spot.
No, not at all.
It's a surface symptom of structural rot happening where you can't even see it.
You might look at a cracked seam and think, well, I should probably patch that eventually. Meanwhile, beneath that crack, fungi are actively breaking down the wood fibers of your joists.
Turning strong timber into mush.
Exactly. And those metal bolts keeping the deck attached to your house, they're actively corroding.
Which pivots us right into the real-world safety implications.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about ugly decks here. We're talking about dangerous ones.
Highly dangerous.
And a huge focus in these sources is the railing. I mean, anyone who has ever been to a backyard party has probably leaned against a railing that had a little bit of give to it.
It happens all the time, and it should immediately set off alarm bells. Building expectations in British Columbia are incredibly strict about this for a reason.
What are the exact rules there?
Well, any walking surface that is more than 600 millimeters, which is about 2 feet above an adjacent surface, generally requires structural guards.
2 feet sounds like nothing, but I mean, falling backwards off a 2-foot drop onto concrete is a hospital trip.
Oh, absolutely.
And the sources emphasize that these railings must be designed to resist very specific structural loads. They can't just be decorative.
Right, they have to hold firm.
Yeah, against the force of an adult tripping and crashing into them.
But that stability relies entirely on the hidden wood framing beneath the surface. Besides a wobbly railing, other subtle warning signs include, like, a walking surface that feels slightly spongy underfoot.
Or rusted metal fasteners.
Yeah, visibly rusted metal fasteners on the stairs, or water pooling in areas that should naturally drain.
Wait, stop right there. Let me play the role of the pragmatic weekend warrior homeowner for a second here.
Okay, go for it.
If I'm out on my deck and I notice my railing is a little wobbly, I'm not calling a contractor and spending thousands of dollars.
Of course not.
I'm going into my garage, I'm grabbing my impact driver and a massive thick screw, and I'm just tightening that railing base back down into the deck. Why isn't that enough?
Because that massive screw isn't actually fixing the problem, it's just giving you a false sense of security.
Really?
Yeah, in professional deck repair, loose railings are treated as urgent false safety hazards. And the reason you can't just drive a bigger screw into the base is that the screw itself is almost never the reason the railing got loose in the first place.
So the metal hardware didn't fail?
The hardware is fine, the problem is the anchor. If a previously solid railing suddenly jiggles, it means the framing, usually the joist or the blocking directly beneath that post, has suffered long-term moisture damage.
Oh, I see.
The wood fibers have rotted away. You can drive a giant metal lag bolt into it if you want, but you cannot anchor a screw into wet pudding.
Oh, wow. So you think you're securing the railing, but you're just like grinding a piece of metal into damp, rotting wood?
Exactly.
The minute someone actually leans their body weight against it, the whole post could just rip right out of the deck.
And there's another hidden danger there: galvanic corrosion.
Galvanic corrosion? What's that?
Well, when moisture gets trapped inside treated wood, the chemicals in the wood, the water, and the metal screw create a literal chemical battery.
Wait, a battery?
Yeah, it creates an acidic environment that eats the metal fastener from the inside out. So even if the wood hasn't completely turned to mush yet, the screws holding your railing together might be shaved down to the thickness of a toothpick from corrosion.
That is terrifying. And it perfectly explains why the sources mentioned that professional contractors consider a repair, quote, based strictly on photos to be completely useless.
Totally useless. A photo from an iPhone only shows the top of the vinyl. It cannot show the galvanic corrosion happening inside the bolt.
Right.
And it certainly cannot show the wet sponge hiding underneath the plywood.
Okay, so since I can't just tighten the screw, how do professionals actually fix a deck that has these hidden issues?
It's a very specific procedure.
Yeah. Our sources detail a very deliberate 6-step diagnostic and repair process, and it starts with the inspection.
Right. Step 1.
The contractor gets in, hunts for hidden risks, reviews the flashing details we talked about, and documents the visible damage. But step 2 is the turning point. Here's where it gets really interesting. Step 2 is identifying the root cause,
which is the single most critical juncture of the entire job. Before anyone picks up a hammer or rips off a piece of vinyl, they have to act like structural detectives.
Trying to figure out why the water got in.
Exactly. Did the original builders mess up the slope, causing water to pool against the house instead of running off the edge?
Or did the vinyl degrade?
Yeah. Did the vinyl lose its plasticizers from UV exposure, making it brittle and prone to cracking?
Because if you don't find the root cause, you're just putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Spot on.
Once they know why it failed, they move to step 3, which is excising the damaged materials. Ripping out the sodden plywood, cutting away the rotted joists, removing the compromised fasteners.
Leaving a clean, dry slate for step 4, which is repairing the underlying structure. They rebuild the structural framing, reinforce the joists, and lay down fresh, dry plywood substrate.
And it's only after all of that structural bonework is finished that we reach step 5, restoring the waterproofing.
Oh, funny.
Putting down the new vinyl membrane, installing new flashing, sealing the seams, and then finally, step 6, the final safety review of the railings and surface.
That's the full process.
Now, tell me why the sequence of those 6 steps is so incredibly rigid. I mean, why can't you just slap a new waterproof membrane over the old wood to stop the leak and call it a day?
Because doing that creates a massive structural time bomb. Let's go back to your raincoat and sweater analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you put a brand new, perfectly sealed raincoat over a thick wool sweater that is already soaking wet, what happens to the sweater?
It doesn't dry out, it just stays wet forever.
Worse than that. In construction, we call it the steam room effect.
Steam room effect.
Yeah. If you seal damp wood inside a brand new, airtight vinyl membrane, the summer sun is going to bake that deck. The moisture trapped inside the wood will heat up, turning the internal cavity of your deck into a literal steam room.
Oh, man.
You are cooking the wood fibers.
Wow.
You will drastically accelerate the fungal rot, destroying the deck from the inside out in a fraction of the time it would normally take.
So you're paying thousands of dollars for a new waterproof surface, only to fast-track the collapse of the wood underneath it.
What's fascinating here is how local contractors use their knowledge of microclimates to avoid these exact disasters.
Like the ones in North Vancouver.
Exactly. A company in North Vancouver knows they can't leave a deck exposed overnight in October, or the structural wood will absorb atmospheric moisture before the new vinyl goes on.
Right. The timing has to be perfect.
They understand how specific local tree debris degrades vinyl seams over time, and they know how to perfectly time complex structural repairs around the impossibly narrow dry weather windows of the Pacific Northwest.
That local expertise leads to the ultimate question for the homeowner, really, the economics of the deck.
The big money question.
Right. Once the autopsy is done, how do you decide whether to repair the localized damage or just tear the entire structure down and start from scratch?
Well, it really comes down to the integrity of the primary framing. A repair is the financially smart choice if the damage is truly isolated.
So just a small section.
Say, one corner of the deck had a pooling issue, or a specific piece of flashing failed. If the vast majority of the joists are dry and solid, and the drainage issue can be permanently fixed, you remove the bad section, patch the membrane, and reinforce the hardware.
But the sources are clear that replacement is mandatory when things cross a certain threshold. And one of the biggest red flags they point out is the failure of the ledger board.
Oh.
Let's talk about that, because that sounds critical.
The ledger board is the heavyweight champion of your deck. It is the long, thick piece of lumber that physically bolts the entire deck structure directly to the framing of your house.
So it's basically the anchor keeping the deck from just sliding away into the backyard.
Exactly. And because it sits right up against the house, it is notoriously vulnerable to water trapped by bad flashing.
Makes sense.
If the ledger board rots, you are dealing with terrifying physics. The deck essentially becomes a giant lever, heavily weighted by furniture and people.
That's a scary visual.
It is. If the connection at the house rots away, that lever effect can literally pull the deck away from the building, causing a catastrophic, instantaneous collapse. If a contractor finds widespread rot at the ledger board, a repair is completely off the table. You are rebuilding.
That makes total sense. And other replacement triggers include, widespread membrane failure, or simply when the cost of chasing the rot and doing piecemeal structural repairs approaches the cost of just building a new deck from scratch.
Yeah, it becomes basic math at that point.
But when we talk about those costs, it's highly variable. Square footage is obvious. Bigger decks cost more. But they also highlight height and site access as a massive factor.
Think about the logistics for a minute. If your deck is sitting 2 feet off a flat, grassy lawn, bringing in fresh lumber and hauling away heavy, waterlogged debris is simple.
Super easy.
But if your deck is hanging off the side of a steep cliff in North Vancouver, 3 stories up with no backyard access, well, that changes everything.
You're suddenly talking about scaffolding, cranes, hauling rotting wood through the living room.
And the labor costs skyrocket. The complexity of the access can sometimes cost more than the materials themselves.
Which is exactly why the maintenance timelines in these guidelines are so aggressive.
Very aggressive.
The recommendation is that standard residential decks in wet coastal environments require an inspection every 1 to 2 years. And if it's an older deck, A strata property or a commercial building, they recommend annual inspections.
That might sound frequent to someone living in a dry climate, but in a coastal rainforest, a tiny failure in a membrane seam in November can lead to a completely rotted structural joist by May.
Wow, that fast.
The environment moves that quickly. You have to catch the breaches before the steam room effect takes hold.
And catching those breaches brings up a fantastic point from the materials regarding the DIY mindset. We established that you can't just drill a bigger screw into a wobbly railing. But what if you spot a small leak or a tear in the vinyl?
Oh, this is a classic mistake.
Homeowners love grabbing waterproof tape or sealants, right?
The guidelines are adamant on this. DIY leak patching on a waterproof structural deck is incredibly risky.
It goes right back to the steam room effect, doesn't it? It reminds me of a plumbing disaster.
How so?
Trying to fix a deck leak with a patch of DIY tape is like noticing a pipe leaking inside your bathroom wall. And instead of fixing the pipe, you just slap a huge piece of duct tape over the wet drywall so you don't have to look at the water stain.
That is the perfect way to look at it. You're hiding the symptom while guaranteeing the destruction of the surrounding structure.
Right. The outside of the wall looks dry, so you pat yourself on the back. Meanwhile, the water is still leaking internally, feeding mold, rotting the studs, and just destroying the house from the inside out.
Exactly.
A DIY patch on a deck just seals the rainwater into the wood underneath.
You are actively trapping the moisture inside the structural envelope. You might save $100 avoiding a service call, but you're accelerating a $10,000 structural rebuild because you didn't let the wood dry out or address the root cause of the tear.
So what does this all mean? Looking across the BC housing guidelines and the diagnostic breakdowns from Rain City decks, the overwhelming theme is that decks are not just patios.
Not at all.
They are highly engineered, suspended structures that work incredibly hard.
They carry immense dynamic loads. I mean, people walking, moving furniture, snow buildup, while simultaneously acting as a roof to protect whatever is beneath them.
All while being continuously battered by the environment.
Right.
And moisture is a silent, patient destroyer. It doesn't loudly announce itself by breaking a window. It just quietly weakens the ledger boards, dissolves the metal fasteners through galvanic corrosion, and turns your safety railings into decorative illusions.
Which means that waterproofing is not an aesthetic choice. It is the armor protecting the very bones of the deck.
This raises an important question for anyone listening who owns a property with a balcony or a deck, especially in a demanding climate.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
When you do your spring cleaning, are you actually evaluating the structural safety of your home, or are you just looking for cosmetic blemishes? Are you hunting for the root cause of that slight spongy feeling under your foot, or are you hoping it just goes away on its own?
Because in home maintenance, ignoring a subtle warning sign never makes the problem disappear. It just compounds the danger and the cost.
That is the hard truth of home ownership right there. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
It's a good one.
The next time you step out onto a balcony or walk out onto a beautiful deck to take in the view with your morning coffee, take just 1 second to look down. Consider the complex, highly stressed ecosystem of lumber, fasteners, and flashing hidden just inches beneath your feet. Ask yourself, are you truly standing on a solid, dry foundation? Or are you just standing on a really taut piece of vinyl hiding a rotting sponge?